This video is going to be an educational video on 200 drive belts. I'm going to answer some questions and solve some myths here that I think people have about drive belts on the 200. As everybody mostly knows, we race prep out a lot of 200s for the national race circuit and for other local circuits. So we've had a lot of time on the dyno to do testing and figure different things out with belts, and so I want to pass it on to you. First thing we're going to cover is the numbering on the drive belts. And this is a myth that I even was involved with for a while until we had plenty of time to test on the dyno and found there was no difference. Some drive belts you're going to see, they have a letter at the end of them. And there's a D, there's an E, and there's a J that I know of right now. We used to think that had something to do with compound or whatever, and basically the bottom line is all that is a vendor identification. You'll see this particular belt with the D on it's made in the USA. Here's a brand new one I just grabbed out of stock here in August 16th of 23. This one has no number and it's made in Japan. As far as durometer readings, we've checked all the different lettered belts. There's no length changes, there's no durometer changes, and there's no measurement changes whatsoever. Now, all belts will run a little inconsistent because they're built on a drum, and depending on which batch you got, we haven't found enough difference there to make a difference in performance. But what we have found is belt width has a big to do with performance. And normally what we would always do is we would take a belt, and when we'd measure the belt, we would go across, I'll hold the calipers, they're going to be upside down for you, but we would always measure our belt this way, and we would tell our differences between belts. After a lot of time on the dyno, what we started to see is when we would put different belts on, we'd see different performance, even though the width of the top width of the belt was right. So after I started investigating, what we found is, and let me show you here, this is my mock-up clutch for training. The angle of the sheaves is just a tiny bit different than the angle of the belt. So what happens is we started to notice on belts that really ran out and sleds that ran better with the same width belt, we decided we'd measure the inside. So what we'll do, this is a used belt I have, and I'm going to turn it inside out, and I'm going to take a new belt and turn it inside out. So where we see the difference is right here on the tip of the cog. Now it's a little harder to measure, but the way we measure it is we take and we'll go right at the very tip. What we found is that the belt starts to wear here and then wears itself out all the way to the top. So you could theoretically have the same width belt, but not as much performance because the center is narrower. So I tell everybody, when you have a belt, if you want to do comparison to a new one and see what your wear is, this is what we do. I'm going to move the rag here. We turn them inside out. We lay them side by side. The first thing we do is we'll match up the cog and we'll line it up to see if one's higher than the other. When we do the measurement, this belt is actually almost 30 thousandths narrower on the inside than it is on a new one. Now, if we rotate this belt the other way, it's only 10 thousandths difference in width here. So what we found is when you start to measure your drive belt and you start to get 25, well, 20 actually, to and above, you're going to start losing performance. And where the performance goes away is overall top speed. It's 50 to 60 foot takeoff seems to be the same, but the overall top speed has changed. So that's one of the key things that you want to look for when you're measuring your belt. Numbers mean nothing as long as it's obviously the right part number for the sled, and there's only one part number. I think this year Dayco is coming out with a new belt. I haven't seen it. It's not ISR legal yet. When we get one, we'll do testing on it to make sure there's no performance gain in it. One of the other things I wanted to tell you about drive belts, very crucial, when we're on the track dyno and we take a sled, we put a brand new belt on it, you know, there's always a break-in time. But the one thing that people forget, and I see it all the time when I go to races, they have their sled setting up on a jack stand and they have their engine idle up just a ways and the sled's just warming up there, and every now and then they'll hit the throttle. The absolute number one thing you can do to gain performance on a 200 snowmobile, especially the hole shot, is when you have the rear of the sled elevated, and I use just a little wooden pencil that I have ground, I stick between the throttle and thumb throttle and the handlebar. I let it go so the belt is turning, approximately 3,000 to 3,500 RPM, and we let it warm up. If you take a new belt or even a old belt that's cold, it takes the shape of basically the clutches. It's shaped like this. Once it warms up, it starts to make itself round. That little bit of break-in and warm up for the belt is good for a couple tenths of a second in 150 feet. Well, you say, well, that's not very much. That's a couple blinks of an eye. But that equates out to about a half to a full sled length on a hard-packed snow. So to recap, make sure your width here is measured, but it's more crucial to measure the inside width. That's the important. Anything over 20 thousandths less dimension than a new one, I would replace the belt, even if the width here is fine. Always warm up your belt. Make sure the numbers and the arrows are going in the right direction, and you'll have success at the track as far as performance. So I hope that helped you. If you have any questions, feel free to call our tech line. We'll be glad to get with you. We always return our calls, but sometimes it takes a little longer. Thank you.